Thank you for listening to the SSPX podcast and our next installment of the SSPX interview series. Today, we're happy to have Father Alphonsus Maria join us to talk about a less well-known priest who deserves much more attention here in the 21st century, Father George Kathrein. Father Alphonsus felt so strongly that Catholics today needed to know more about this Australian Redemptorist that he wrote a biography, The Story of Father George Kathrein, which has been published by Angelus Press. His story is the story of the early days of the crisis in the Church. His story mirrors that of the Society of St. Pius X's founder, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And as Bishop Bernard Fillet wrote in the foreword to this book about Father Kathrein, quote, "Suddenly the normal actions, the normal life turns into heroism. This example should give us joy and courage for our times." Let's join Father Alphonsus Maria now to learn more about this quiet, heroic priest.
So, Father, you just wrote a biography on the story of Father George Kathrein. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who was Father Kathrein?
Father Kathrein, George Kathrein, he was born in 1898 and he died in 1989. So he was born in Austria in a little village in the Austrian Tyrol, high up in the Alps, the village of Fiss. His family, very pious Catholics. They were influenced by the Redemptorist fathers from Innsbruck, actually. And one little story was that Mrs. Kathrein, the mother of the family, before she was married, she was getting on in years. She was approaching 30 and wondering, what was going to happen, if she was going to get married or not. So there was a Redemptorist priest up there preaching a parish mission. And she approached the priest and said, "Father, what should I do in terms of marriage?" And he said, "You will be approached by 3 men asking your hand in marriage. Take the third." And that is how she became Mrs. Kathrein. So the family had to move to Chicago in 1903 when little Father Kathrein was only 5 years old. And they settled in the Redemptorist parish of Old St. Michael's in Old Town, Chicago. And they had numerous relatives that moved there before them. And they had numerous cousins, etc., in the same parish. So they grew up in this Redemptorist parish. Chicago was a bad city at the time, actually, a lot murders happening, etc. And yet the children, they always stayed close, as they said, they stayed close to God, to their family, and to their parish school. And it was a family of 9 children. 2 of the children died in childhood back in Austria. Of the 7 children who came to adulthood, 5 of them became religious. 3 of them became Redemptorists particularly. There were 5 religious, and the other 2 brothers, the only others who did not become religious, they both married the same woman. And to find out how that happened, you have to read the biography. So Father Kathrein, when he was a young man, he realized that he had a vocation. He was told that he should try the Redemptorists because he had grown up among Redemptorists, etc. Although it was actually a Marianist brother who told him that he should try the Redemptorists. And so the biography, it goes through his life, and I look at his life through this lens of his vocation. How did God start this vocation, the seed of this vocation? How did that seed grow? How did his vocation continue, and how did it change over the years? And so we start off looking at his family, because his parents were very pious people. They were Third Order Franciscans, always consistent about their prayers, about a spirit of faith in the family, faithful to their daily rosary, etc. That's how 5 of the children ended up with religious vocations. And then Father Kathrein, he followed this grace of God through all these years, through his novitiate. After his ordination, he became a professor in the Redemptorist seminary, pre-seminary, for a number of years. He later became a parish priest also in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and various places. In California also, it was in Whittier, that's near Los Angeles, Fresno, and Oakland. Now, when the crisis in the church came in the 1960s, he had cooperated with God's grace in this vocation for so many years that he never said the Novus Ordo Mass. He was always faithful to the Tridentine Mass. So he realized that something radically wrong was going on in the church. He had some clout in the province because he had been the consultor to the provincial of Oakland. And so basically what the Redemptorist said is, you don't tell us what you're doing on the weekends, and we won't ask you. So that's how he managed to get away with saying the traditional Mass. And he helped out the Society of St. Pius X from 1975, so that was when Father Post came to California, until Father Kathrein died in 1989. And most of the society chapels in Northern California go back to Father Kathrein. He either started them himself or he influenced it. So, for example, Carmichael, California, St. Michael's in Sacramento, St. Michael's in Bakersfield. Then there was also Walnut Creek, California, which has been defunct for many, many years. Those chapels were all basically started by Father Kathrein. And then he also went to South Lake Tahoe, which is now Carson City, Nevada, and also Campbell, California, which is now Los Gatos, California. So he helped out the society every weekend all these years, supporting the work of Archbishop Lefebvre, and we've been given 18 letters by a lady who wishes to remain anonymous, but she saved these 18 letters that Father Kathrein had written back in the 1970s to various members of her family, and in each letter he goes through one by one these different aspects of the crisis in the church, whether it's with regards to the Novus Ordo Mass, or the obligation of attending the Novus Ordo Mass, or of the why it's okay to attend the traditional Mass. It can be with regards to the supply jurisdiction for marriages and confessions for traditional priests, etc. Each one of these letters, he's outlining a whole theology, because he was an intellectual. So he outlines this whole theology of the crisis. And when you take what Father Kathrein wrote and set it next to what Archbishop Lefebvre wrote, and you just see their thinking was identical, which is really beautiful to see this identical way of thinking about the crisis in the church. And Father Kathrein always had a very great respect and admiration for Archbishop Lefebvre. He was always faithful to the society, even though he lived in his Redemptorist house until he died. Still, he helped out the society until he died. He was always faithful to the Archbishop and to the society. So his vocation did change then in those last 20 years of his life, from 1969 until 1989. I can also mention that the Post Falls, in a certain way, owes its origin to Father Kathrein, because while everyone knows about Father Deboucher, of course, nevertheless, before Father Deboucher, up there in Post Falls, it was Father Kathrein in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, because Father Post explains this in one of his writings. He says that back in 1968, that was even before the Novus Ordo came out, Father Kathrein was saying the Latin Mass on a side altar in St. Thomas Church, that was the Redemptorist Church in Coeur d'Alene, and there were more people going to his Latin Mass on the side altar than there were going to the English translation. At that time, it wasn't the Novus Ordo. It was still sort of one of those normative forms that was going towards the Novus Ordo. And it was from there, the Redemptorist superior said, we can't handle this, so we're going to just ship you off to Oakland, California, which was good for the rest of us who ended up knowing him in California, of course, and how he touched everyone in California. But it was after Father Kathrein left from Coeur d'Alene, those faithful there then found Father Deboucher, and that was the beginning of Immaculate Conception Church in Post Falls. It actually, in that sense, it does go back to Father Kathrein even. So he had a lot to do with the traditionalist movement on the West Coast. He died a very holy death, April the 3rd of 1989. It was the Feast of the Annunciation of Our Lady, because of when Easter fell, the Annunciation had to be transferred to the 3rd of April. St. Alphonsus, our founder, actually says that we should all hope to die on a Saturday or a feast day dedicated to Our Lady as a sign of our love and devotion. to the Blessed Virgin. And of course, St. Alphonsus died on a Wednesday. But Father Kathrein died on the feast of the Annunciation, to which he had a very great devotion. He had a very great devotion to the mystery of the Incarnation. He loved Christmas. Redemptorists actually always celebrate the 25th of every month as Little Christmas. That actually comes from the Carmelites, in fact, that St. Alphonsus took on also. So every 25th of the month we have special devotions. The statue of the infant in the crib is put out on the altar, and there's certain devotions written by St. Alphonsus that are done each 25th of the month. And then in the evening after the meal, then there's Christmas carols that are sung each 25th. So Father Kathrein had kept this great love for the infant Jesus, for the mystery of the Incarnation, all his life long, and it was appropriate that he died on the feast of the Annunciation, that great feast of Our Lady. The Father Kathrein, many people who still remember him, in their 50, people would be in their 50s or more by now because he's been gone 34 years. Father Kathrein, people still remember him. They oftentimes refer to him as the Holy Father Kathrein. He had a reputation for sanctity. He was very edifying his whole life. People often associate him with his poverty. He had this incredible spirit of poverty. Everything that he wore was patched, or it was secondhand. It was really cheap, etc. He never spent any money on himself. When he was going traveling, beggars would come up to him, and he only had like a peanut butter sandwich or something, and he'd give it to them. He didn't left nothing for himself. So he said, I'm not going to buy the food that's in the train stations because it's a sandwich and it costs $2. That's too much for me to buy. So he was this incredible spirit of poverty. People remember how he used to melt down the wax stubs from the candles and then melt them into these wax jars that he would then put on the altar for all night vigils with the Blessed Sacrament. So he had this wonderful spirit of poverty. I would say that it was his spirit of recollection that impressed me the most as a child. I can remember that one of his favorite phrases from the Gospels was this phrase from our Lord in the Last Supper, where Jesus says, "Abide in me and I in you." And that really sums up beautifully this interior life of Father Kathrein. Even when he was busy, and he was very busy, dealing with people and helping people and teaching them, etc., he was always focused on God. It was always about God first. And it was because it was about God first that he was able to help so many souls. So it's his spirit of recollection. I inherited some of his sermons and like that after he had died. And among his sermons, he used to put on these little sermon notes on like any little piece of paper. And so there's this little piece of paper among those notes. And it says, "Prayer is the occupation of the soul with God. Recollection is the preoccupation of the soul with God." And that really sums up beautifully the spirit of Father Kathrein. He's definitely while he was very, very active, very clearly very clearly contemplative as well. Why is he important nowadays? Because of his fidelity to Catholic tradition. He did not wander one way or the other. He was never thinking about, should I become a sedevacantist or should I become a modernist? No, he always knew that he was a traditional Catholic, no matter what. One of his phrases, which is used as the motto for the biography, is, "Only what the Church has always taught and believed, nothing more, nothing less." And that really sums up the spirit of faith of Father Kathrein also. He did not waver one side or the other. He was never questioning sort of like, is this really what the Church teaches? No, he knew it and he kept to it, and he was able to pass it on to each generation since.
And Father, so that's kind of the life of Father Kathrein. Why write the biography on him?
Well, Father Kathrein, he converted my family to Catholicism back in the 1970s. So I felt that I owed it to him He was my first spiritual father, mentor. Honestly, I can say that anything that I have good in me, after God and Our Lady, I owed entirely to Father Kathrein. He had such an influence over my life. There were the last 13 years of his life, from the time I was 5 until the time I was 18. I would serve Mass regularly for Father Kathrein, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. So I grew up with this edifying, holy, old Redemptorist who was, Redemptorist down to his fingertips, and totally traditional Catholic all the way. And it was a rare privilege that I cannot thank God enough for, to have known him for those 13 years. And that's certainly what made me determined to become a Redemptorist myself. And I can certainly say that I do not regret one moment of being a Redemptorist. And again, that's thanks, after God and Our Lady, to Father Kathrein. Now, I started collecting information on Father Kathrein back in he died in 1989. I started collecting stories about him, and it was about 1998. Just, people would see, oh, you're a Redemptorist. Oh, hey, I knew Father Kathrein. Tell me these anecdotes. I started writing them down. And then it was just last year, 2021, I was talking to the Redemptorist archivist, Patrick Hayes, out in Philadelphia. He helps the modern Redemptorists there. And I was talking to him about someone else, and I mentioned that I was thinking about writing this biography of Father Kathrein. And he said, "Oh, hey, I've seen Father Kathrein's file here in the archives. So if you want any help, I can certainly help you out. And if you ever get around to writing it, give me a copy for our archives." So I thought, oh, maybe that's divine providence trying to say something to me. And I looked at my calendar, and for the first time in 21 years of my priesthood, I realized I don't have anything scheduled for 6 weeks. So I thought, oh, I guess this is God saying something. So I used those 6 weeks then to do the first rough draft of the biography. Over the years, I've interviewed about 60 people for the biography. So there's a whole wealth of anecdotes, stories, jokes about Father Kathrein as well. Many, many different stories. Patrick Hayes, the archivist from the Redemptorist, was very helpful. And he opened up the archives to me. He sent me over 200 pages of documents and letters and all sorts of things about Father Kathrein. So a lot of that made its way into this biography, and there were things about Father Kathrein I had certainly never heard of myself in my life. Fascinating stories. So that was a big impulse in writing this book. Now, another reason, among several, one reason for writing this book is lest these stories be lost, because the older generation of traditional Catholics are dying off now. And there is a real danger, a number of us priests have been talking about this for a few years now, there's a real danger that the younger generation of traditional Catholics growing up now, they have absolutely no idea what their parents and grandparents went through to remain traditional Catholics. And so it's a reminder, this biography is a reminder to the younger generation of what their grandparents went through in order to keep their faith, and to remind them also the sufferings of the traditional Catholics, and to appreciate what they went through. I think that's an important aspect, and to realize that the crisis in the church is still going on, 50, 60 years later, is still going on, and the fight remains the same, because even though things have mutated, they have changed over the years, over the decades, but the fight itself remains the same. That as traditional Catholics, we are dedicated heart and soul to eradicating the neo-modernist errors from the Catholic Church, and to return both to the hierarchy and to the poor faithful who have been abandoned by the hierarchy all these years, to return to them this treasure, this pearl of great price of the traditional Catholic faith, because it's only traditional Catholicism that is going to be able to give to souls that grace, that life of God that we need in order to save our souls and also to be sanctified. Another reason for writing this biography is to encourage other writers, because, as I say, the older generation are dying off, and we don't want these stories to be lost. I know that there are a few trad history books that are in the pipeline at the moment. I can think of 3 that I've been told about, and certainly much to be encouraged. The lives of these older priests, lest they be forgotten. The histories also of each of the traditional Catholic chapels, lest that be forgotten. And it's important, I think, for us to be able to get these things written down. It doesn't even have to be written down at the first. Obviously, a good thing is to be able to get to the old timers, and then to, even if it's like a recording, let them, make them a recording of what their memories are from those early years, from the 60s and 70s and 80s, and then eventually take those recordings and then transcribe them and turn that into something that can be published. But I think this is an important thing, lest it be lost.
Thank you for listening to or watching the SSPX podcast. Please keep in mind the best way to help more people see these videos and to hear this podcast is to subscribe on YouTube or subscribe on your favorite podcast app and rate or review wherever you listen. Also, please remember, this is an apostolate. It's free to listen or to watch anytime, but we also need your help. Would you please consider submitting a one-time donation or sign up for a small $5, $10, or $20 a month donation at sspxpodcast.com? This helps us to continue this important work of sharing the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism with as many people as possible. Until next time, thank you for listening, and God bless you.